Hey guys, it's your girl Aisha, aka Geek XX Chic, and I'm back with another review to The Flash. This one is for the latest episode, which was called Memorabilia. And it was okay, it was interesting. This one was definitely more of a introspective episode comparatively to some of the other ones. We haven't had a ton of action so far in the back half of this season, but my guess is that we are culminating to something fairly large as far as when we get down the line, face off against Cicada, potentially also figuring out the whole thing with Eobard Thawne. But let's just kind of talk about a couple of things that kind of stood out to me in this episode. I think the first one, just because it's the shortest point, is really that, yeah, waking up Grace. I said this last week that it probably wasn't the greatest idea. I was thinking more about how Cicada would respond to it in the sense of him thinking, well, you know, metas don't do any good, and maybe if he thought it came from a meta, he wouldn't be okay with it. But this was very interesting that we finally got a chance to see Grace. Like I think I mentioned 1 or 2 episodes ago that we really haven't seen much of her outside of the episode where we had Orlan's backstory. We got to learn more about how he got to where he is now. So it was nice to actually see that little actress get a chance to give her talents, or showcase her talents, I should say. And we got to see a little bit more into Grace's world and kind of where she was coming from on certain things. Now, of course, we didn't get an extensive backstory on her, but we did learn in the first half of the season that her parents were killed by a meta, and that's how she ended up in Orlan's care. So it does make sense that Grace would innately have a bias, against metas. I mean, I think anyone would feel that way about someone who seemingly senselessly killed her parents. And so in that case, right off the bat, I don't think that Barry and crew really thought about what it would potentially mean to her to interact with a meta without actually understanding the fact that this girl, more than Orlan, has a very personal reason why she would distrust and dislike metas. And of course, Nora going in half-cocked, which we'll come to in a minute, just going in there and just thinking she could just pull this girl out into consciousness. It was just irresponsible, first and foremost. But again, Nora's lying, I think, is really what made it all worse. And I don't know that Barry and Iris would have handled it differently, but I do think potentially that Barry might have come in and just been honest with Grace and been like, listen, I'm a meta. And I understand where, because Barry does understand where she's coming from, actually much better than Nora ever could. Nora kept trying to use all these background stories of hers to try to make inroads with Grace, but the reality is she doesn't really have the same story or the same kind of place to come from. And she didn't even really try to empathize with Grace so much as try to be like, look, I know what you're going through, but let's just get through this portal. This girl is dealing with a lot of trauma. Not only the trauma of her parents dying, but the trauma of living with an uncle who was a complete jackass for the first, year or so that she lived with him, and then being put into a coma, right? She's dealing with a lot. So you can't just come in there and just feel like you can say a couple of nice stories and she's just gonna run along with you without any type of defenses coming up. I just think that it would have been so different. I feel like Barry would have likely been honest with her and been like, you know what? I am a meta. But also, I know what it's like to have your parents killed by a meta. That happened to me. That's what happened to me. It literally happened to Barry. His mother was killed. Both his parents were killed by metas. Speedsters at that. So he really could relate to Grace on that level, and he would have been able potentially to speak to her about how angry she's feeling, and justifiably so, and that it's okay for her to be angry and hurt, but to understand that just like not all people do bad things, all humans, I should say, not all metas do bad things. And maybe, I'm not saying it would have been an absolute lock, but Grace clearly has trust issues for good reason. And the fact that this meta came in and lied to her just reinforced this lingering anger and hate that she already felt towards metas and just made it worse. So, as usual, sadly, Nora has made things worse. She's kind of had a bad pattern of doing that since she arrived. Digressing. Yeah, it was just one of those things where I don't think I anticipated that Grace would have that level of anger and hatred inside of her, but it makes sense. If Orlan's been coming to her bedside every single day since she was put in this coma, and she can hear everything he's saying, and all of it is just hate speech, hate spewing, hate. Oh, metas are evil. Look what metas are doing. Metas, metas, metas. They're all evil. Like, that's all it's filling her mind. And she's got nothing else, right? And then she's got this one doctor, the one doctor who seems to be attending to her, spewing the same garbage, right? So, of course, her mind's going to just be sitting here marinating on these things and forming opinions that are not true, but it's not like she's getting any other types of input. That, and potentially the little piece of tech in her brain might potentially be amplifying that to some degree. But it does make me see my theory that Grace might be a meta of some sort is kind of coming true, because much like Orlin, she's got a piece embedded inside of her. So like with Orlin, you know, it's in his chest, it's creating meta powers in him. Same thing's happening to Grace, but it does make me wonder what she's going to be capable of. Like right now, she's choosing to stay in her coma, which I think is more for plot purposes, but I'm really terrified for when she gets out. She might have her motivation to finally leave this place now that she wants to go after Nora. Even though her defense mechanism tried to kill her and killed her, the nice version of Orlin. That's the only part I didn't quite understand. Anyway, Nora going in by herself was a bad idea just for the sake of trying to keep her parents from potentially seeing her hook up with the future Reverse Flash. And we're going to see the repercussions of that roll out. I'm sure that's definitely going to roll somewhat into the finale as well. But I just have a feeling that if Grace decides to wake up at this point, she is going to be, I'm wondering, I think something she's going to be able to do, and it's going to have to do with maybe like mind control, or I don't know. I just feel like she's going to have a power that has something to do with thoughts and brains because of where the chip's located. So that's terrifying to me. I've watched enough horror movies where kids are the villains, and it's pretty terrifying because kids, unlike adults, don't have the capacity to see the long-term effect of their actions. So they're a lot more wanton and brazen and kind of crazy with what they do. So I'm kind of hoping Grace just stays out for now, potentially permanently. Now moving on to, I guess the other short arc in the whole episode was Cisco came back, yay. And of course, everything he was saying is Medicare, 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 Medicare. But it was kind of cute to see Ralph take him out and try to get him out of this funk, which I do believe was what kicked him into this funk was the breakup with Gypsy. But again, I love Cisco. I do. I love that character, and I love Carlos's character. I love Carlos the way he plays him. I am getting annoyed with the amount of Medicare talk. Like, it's just driving me crazy to see this shift in Cisco's character that makes no sense to me. Like, I just can't justify it. Like, one attack by a meta, one attack, which wasn't even a fatal one, but I get it. He was definitely shook up for it. But still, one attack and he's ready to throw away all of his powers and just be out there, and he's assuming that there's thousands of other metas who feel the same way. Like, just that statement he made to Ralph when they were in the bar, and he's like, I should be working on this cure. There's the hundreds of metas that want to have this cure and they don't want to have these powers. It's like, well, calm down, Cisco, because you're starting to get that tinge in your voice that people get, you know, right before the next step is everybody should take the cure, whether they like it or not. Maybe we need to have a world with no metas. You know, it's shaky ground. It's a slippery slope that can definitely start happening when you start talking like that. But again, it's just so out of character for Cisco, and it's just such a waste of that character and such a waste of Carlos's skills once again. I mean, the girl in the bar was cute. Was her name Camilla, whatever? I mean, she's cute. I'm not against Cisco getting some love. He deserves all the love in the world. However, I just feel at this point, it doesn't necessarily need to be another romantic arc for him, right? Like, can we not have Cisco working, just doing what he did before? Like, really working with the Flash, using, now that his vibe powers are no longer hurting him, figuring out better ways to use his vibes so that he can figure out a way to defeat Cicada, I don't know, just something better than this. Like, or maybe figuring out how he can amplify his powers so that he could be as good as Reverb. I just feel like there's just so many ways we could be going with him. I mean, look at all the different things they're trying to throw into Killer Frost and Caitlyn's way. Why are we not seeing this with Cisco? Why do we have him on this annoying, completely out of character arc of trying to get rid of his powers and potentially other people's? Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. But that also brings me to that last part where Barry was saying that he wants to use the Medicure on Cicada, and that doesn't really make sense to me, because Cicada's a meta, kinda. Like, if you took the pieces of the satellite out of him, he wouldn't be a meta anymore. I don't think. We don't know. I guess we don't know for sure, because Caitlyn never did respond with whether or not Cicada's DNA has changed. But it sounds to me like the source of the power, everything comes from those pieces of the satellite. So if you could get those out of Cicada, power's gone. Do you know what I mean? Or they would fade over time because he wouldn't be getting that source continuing to it. Same way that Cisco's powers are coming back to him now that the pieces of the dagger are out of his hand. So I don't know. It just seems like that theory doesn't quite make sense, but there's been a lot of things this season that have not really added up, which is quite annoying, like the stuff with how Caitlyn became meta and why Killer Frost is not really Killer Frost because she hasn't killed anyone, but she's still kind of a jerk. Like, it's just too much stuff going on that isn't really adding up to someplace that makes sense, which is annoying to me considering how cohesive so much of the storyline was in season 4. I know the writers are capable of it. I just don't know why they're not doing it this season. I don't know what this cure or how they think they're going to get it to Orlin, or if they think it's going to be the answer, right? It's not really the answer, because even if Orlin doesn't have the power of the dagger, it doesn't necessarily mean he won't stop killing people. But I guess that's really what triggered it for Barry, was going and seeing that in the future Cicada never stops killing. And then of course we found out that this is we finally found out why Nora is doing all this, which I'm going to come back to my issue with that. But yeah, I can see how it kind of kicked Barry in the pants of thinking, okay, if his powers aren't there, it might stop him. But that isn't necessarily the case. I mean, look at other other villains like the Trickster and things like that. They didn't have meta powers. They used their other gifts or avenues to hurt people. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a meta thing. So anyway, that kind of brings us to the next thing, which was Barry and Iris going through Nora's memories. And of course, Iris having these really heartbreaking moments of, again, worrying about what kind of a mother she might be in the future. And I know that it seemed like we kind of tied that up in a bow earlier in the season, but I guess actually seeing her react that way to Nora, just kind of a snappy, cold, condescending way, it was, you know, I think that would put anybody on edge and make anyone feel really badly, especially if you know that that's not something you would typically do. And so I'm really glad that Barry was there with her during that moment, because I think early in the season, a lot of the stuff that was like the catty stuff between her and Nora always happened when Barry wasn't there. In this moment where she saw the future version of herself, and I put that in quotes because as we found out later on, it wasn't even real, that seeing that she could potentially be like that shook her to the core, and she just could not handle the idea that she'd be the kind of mom that was that dismissive and hurtful towards her child. And I love that Barry was right in there, and he was like, look, I know that you're not this person, and it's like, you're making decisions right now that are changing the kind of person you were in the future. This, like, even if that was you, like, you don't have to be her anymore. Like, let go of this idea that just because Nora experienced that already, that you have to follow that same path. And of course, she brought up the fact that, like, the only newspaper name was the same one that wrote the article that said Barry disappears. So of course, in her mind, she's like, the future's locked. We can't do anything about it. But that's clearly not true. We already know that things have changed. Obviously, Nora showing up, changing the trajectory of the satellite, that created this cicada. So all of that stuff's kind of, it's just all wrapping up into the idea that the future is malleable. And that's exactly what we saw in the book that Nora has, the time traveling book of Thawne's. Like, time is malleable. So I'm glad that Barry was there to reinforce to her that Iris is a kind person, always has been, always will be, and any future with her would be beautiful. And I'm glad she got to see the moment that when they had to look for the portal, that it wasn't actually the way it went down. That was just Nora's hurt and anger over just being an angsty child that projected Iris being that way. But the reality, as we saw, was that Iris is actually very caring and very loving, and probably did her best to be a loving mom to Nora in the future. I'm glad that came out, which of course segued into that wonderful talk between Iris and Nora we saw near the end. It was so nice to hear Nora finally see things from a mature point of view, which is that, you know what, you went through a lot, you lost everything. I was angry at you. Everything that, you know, I took out on you is about my feelings, not necessarily that you were a terrible parent. And that you put this chip on me, it wasn't because you wanted to, like, hold me back or whatever. You did it to protect me. And I can see why you do it. Like, this is what I said since episode, like, 4, or whenever she talked about the chip, I said this, right? I'm like, there's no way Iris would have done that for a malicious reason. And I'm glad Nora's finally acting the way she really should have acted earlier this season, but I'm gonna let that go. But yeah, like, I'm seeing Nora act a little bit more. That speech to me is the kind of Nora I expected maturity-wise to see in the beginning of the season. So I really hope that whatever writers wrote that will continue to write for Nora and put her on an upswing, even though she keeps doing stupid things like running into that machine by herself. But again, we know that she did that primarily to try to protect this secret. And then we saw at the end, which brings me to the whole Nora saying in her entry to Eobard that she's willing to lie and potentially build this deep distrust between her and her parents because she loves them, she doesn't want them to get hurt, and she wants to catch Cicada. And what gets me is that at first I thought she meant to catch Cicada of the future, but Cicada of the future is not the same Cicada as now. So I'm kind of confused about that, but maybe I'm overthinking it. But I just don't feel like that's a deep enough reason to keep lying to them about this. That yes, they should catch Cicada or try to stop him, for sure. It's awful that he ended up killing over 100 people in the future. But nothing will truly get resolved between the two of them, well, between all that family, between the West Allen family, while this bomb is waiting to go off. It's going to hurt. She's definitely going to hurt feelings, but if she goes to her parents now and tells them the truth and tells them everything about how Eobard left out major details like, oh, by the way, I killed your grandma, will they be upset? Yes, Barry and Iris will definitely be upset, but they are two of the most forgiving people in the world. If she hasn't learned that by now, like, I don't even know. So I feel like there's just really no reason at this point, with the more she's getting to know her parents, for her to continue to lie about this. But I do get the idea that the more you hold on to the lie, it's harder for you to come clean, because you start to, in your mind, spin all these different scenarios of how horrible things could go when the truth comes out. In the end, the truth will always set you free, and Nora's going to be beholden not only to Eobard, but to her conscience until she finally comes out and tells the truth about this. I'm hoping she gets a chance to do that before Sherlock does, which, okay, side note, absolutely loved Sherlock just toying with Nora. Like, he knows she's lying. He knows she's keeping things from everyone. And I love that he's just gonna slowly but surely niggle here and niggle there and just keep poking at her just to see how she reacts. And again, maybe even push her to make a big misstep. But the fact that he was smart enough to ask Barry what her defense mechanism manifested as was brilliant. And it really, really shocks me that Barry wasn't more disturbed by the fact that out of all the costumes in that museum, she would choose the Reverse Flash even after Barry told her what he did. Like, that should tell him something, that something's a little off, and maybe ask Nora about that. But I'm hoping that's not something we're gonna drop, because that's a huge anvil I feel like both Barry and Iris were witness to. That's pretty much it for the episode, guys. As I said, it was okay. Again, I don't feel like we're moving too much further with the plot, which is kind of sad after all this time, but I'm hoping we're gonna get some ramp up now that we're getting closer to the tail end of the season. I honestly don't know where we're gonna take this and whether or not we're just gonna end with somehow taking Cicada down, or with everyone figuring out that Eobard's working from the future. But either way, I just want to know which way we're going and take a really, like, legit step in that direction. What did you guys think of this episode? How are you feeling about this whole reason that Nora is sitting here and lying to her parents? Do you think it's legit, or do you think that maybe there's more to it? Please leave your comments below. You know I love reading them and getting involved in that conversation with you. And if you like this video, guys, please click like. And if you see more from this geeky face, please click subscribe. Until next time, see ya.